This video is sponsored by Squarespace. Warhammer 40k 11th edition is finally here, and while this is mostly a painting channel, I do actually play the game as well, and I have a lot of unsolicited opinions on the rules. So while we wait for my Armageddon box to arrive in the mail, today I'd like to talk about my impressions of Warhammer 10th edition, what's changed in 11th edition, as well as if I think these are good changes or bad changes. 10th edition in review. So just so you know where I'm coming from, I've been playing Warhammer 10th edition for about a year and a half now. I play about once a month on average, sometimes twice a month. My main army is Orcs, and my secondary army, which I've only played a few games with, is Dark Angels. Before getting into 40k, the only other real war games I had played were mostly skirmish games like Kill Team. I enjoy both games, and my main overall opinion on Warhammer 10th edition is still that it's fine. It's an increasingly overpriced game, especially if you're buying all of the individual components from the company that makes the game. It's definitely not the most exciting rule set out there. There's a lot of other games and companies that I respect a lot more for their innovative design and consumer friendliness. So is Warhammer 40k my favorite war game? No. Is Warhammer 40k the war game I play the most? Yes. But it's still a fun game, and I continue to enjoy playing it because it connects me to the widest possible community of players. I love painting the models, building armies, I love talking about the lore, reading all of the books about the lore. It's a cool setting. There's a lot that is appealing about it. All of these factors, as well as the really fun narrative set of rules that is Warhammer 40k Crusade, have been more than enough to keep me interested in playing this game over the past year and a half. So while I do still have a lot of common complaints about the game that a lot of other people have, mainly that it would be better as an alternating activation style game and that the objective capturing elements of the game do get a little bit boring over time. The game is also extremely long, taking about 4 hours to play a single match, and actually I don't mind that so much as I don't like how little happens in that 4 hours. And if the game is going to be that long, it might be more fun if your models lasted a little bit longer on the board and weren't so disposable. So now that you know all of my opinions and thoughts on Warhammer 10th edition, let's talk about what's changed in 11th and see if any of these things have gotten better or worse. Core rules. One of the first things I noticed when paging through the new core rules document for 11th edition is that every rule has a reference number. And while at first I wasn't quite sure about this, I felt like the rules document was reading sort of like a legal document. The further in I read, the more I really appreciated all of these reference numbers, as it makes it so much easier to reference specific rules in the way that often comes up when you're playing the game. So already this is a massive improvement over the previous rule set. Good job. Unit coherency. Unit coherency rules have changed a little bit. It's pretty much the same as it was before, but they've reworded it a little bit to make it a little bit easier to understand. So while before all of the models in a unit needed to be within 2 inches horizontally and 5 inches vertically of one other model in the unit, and even more if the unit is larger, now your units just need to be within 2 inches of one other model, plus it needs to be within 9 inches of every other model. I believe this is just to prevent people from playing line hammer, like stretching your unit out in one long line. So that's probably a good thing, and this rule also is a lot easier to understand, I think, than the previous version. Engagement range. Engagement range has now changed from 1 inch to 2 inches, which is actually a pretty big change. This feels a little weird to me, but as a melee heavy army, I'm definitely not complaining about this change. There's definitely been a few cases in recent games where if I had a little bit more engagement range, it would have been to my advantage, so I'm not angry about this, but it does feel a little weird that you can hit someone with a sword when you're like multiple meters away from them, but then again, with the constant scale creep, I guess it will make sense eventually once Space Marines are this big. Rewording and reorganization. For the next few sections of the rules, I found that not a lot had actually changed in any meaningful way, but they have done a much better job at consolidating rules, rewording things, and using diagrams to explain the rules. So I really think a lot of these sections are huge improvements over the 10th edition rules documents. For example, we now have rules like hazard, which covers a lot of similar cases like deadly demise, where things have a chance to blow up. So I really like when they do that. They've taken a number of similar rules and just consolidated them into a keyword, which you can then put in a reference section or something. They've also included a lot of really helpful diagrams. I feel like all of the example cases here are really easy to understand and covers a lot of edge cases, which I really appreciate. And they've also got a lot of the rules consolidated into these little cards now, which are composed of if-then statements, which makes things a lot easier to understand for, again, edge cases and strange scenarios. You just go through the whole thing and say, like, if this happens, then this happens. If this isn't the case, then this happens. So great organization. I think these rules are a lot easier to understand than the 10th edition rulebook. Movement. Once again, not a lot has effectively changed in the movement section, but things are much better organized and consolidated into better wording. As I was saying in the last section, each move is now on its own little card, and it has, again, if-then statements explaining to you when you can make certain moves, when you can't make certain moves, and then what the effect is going to be. Once again, you can see they use the hazard keyword here for desperate escapes rather than having a whole explanation of how desperate escapes works. So while desperate escape hasn't changed that much as a rule, you can just reference in your mind, oh, it's the hazard rule. And it's one less thing to remember as a player, and it's a lot cleaner in a rulebook. But do you know what else is a lot cleaner and easier to remember and looks good in a rulebook? That's right, it's this video's sponsor, Squarespace. Squarespace is the all-in-one website and hosting platform for all of your website needs. They've got pre-made layouts and templates for just about any site you could imagine, whether you want a portfolio, a blog, or a landing page for your business. Everything in here is super easy to use with no coding required. It's all drop-down menus to change all the different options, as well as the drag-and-drop fluid engine for arranging different elements on the page. They also have templates for online stores or even a hub for any services you might want to offer. Let's say you're a commission painter, this would be an ideal fit for that, with the built-in option to send invoices or accept payments from a number of different payment processors. So if you need a website, why not check out squarespace.com today for a free 14-day trial. And then when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/Dana Howl for 10% off your very first purchase of a website or domain. And now back to our video. Continuing on to the rules for shooting each other, once again, everything is very well organized here. A great example is the new close quarters shooting rules, which, again, effectively not anything has changed from what I can see. It's just worded better and easier to understand. There's also a new type of shooting called indirect fire for any weapons that have the barrage keyword, which can target an entire area without needing a line of sight. So I think that'll work really well in combination with the new hidden rules from the terrain section, which we will get into later. Fighting. While it doesn't seem like a lot has changed for melee attacks in this edition, trust me, a lot has effectively changed. For one thing, your pile-in range now extends to 5 inches, which I think combined with the 2-inch engagement range is going to make melee fighters absolutely deadly. And that's not even taking into account the new overrun fight action, which seems to let you pile in a second time. Am I reading that correctly? So between all of these changes, I can definitely see why people are already calling this the melee attack edition. It seems like the new word for melee attack has been changed to just fight, which is fine, I guess. It just leads to some funny verbiage where it says when you do a fight. But personally, I think it should have been changed to crump, as this is the Orc edition. Terrain. One of the most advertised elements of 11th edition is all of the new terrain rules. And I'll be honest, throughout all of my time playing 10th edition, we just kind of ignored the terrain rules and just used our best judgment based on what would make sense. I don't know if my group ever fully understood the terrain rules, so it's really nice that they've clarified everything here, and I pretty much like everything they have here. I think it makes a lot of sense. I know that the rules for this game are always a balance between more narrative or casual players and the more competitive players, so terrain is one of those difficult things where if you're playing at home, you can kind of just eyeball it, and if you're playing in a tournament, terrain is a lot harder to define all of the rules. So I think they've done a really good job at combining those two things and making terrain fun and flavorful and basically working the way you imagine it would, but also working really well for a competitive rule set. I mean, I think it does. I'm not a competitive player. For some specifics, I really like how the cover rule now affects the attack roll and not the save roll. That's just way easier to remember and implement in games. I absolutely love the new hidden rule, which means that if your models are inside a building and none of the enemy models are within 15 inches of it, they basically can't shoot at them, they can't detect them. As not only does this make melee-focused armies a lot more survivable against ranged heavy armies, like Tau, for instance, but also I think even from a narrative perspective, it's kind of cool to have this fog of war type of thing going on, where if you're playing a more narrative-heavy game, you could even sort of role play that you don't know those models are even there. I would also like to extend my compliments once again to whoever's done all of the diagrams and examples in this rulebook. They've done a really good job here, especially with the terrain rules. I also appreciate that they didn't fully flatten all of the terrain rules. When I first saw those new terrain templates, I was like a little bit concerned that we might just be getting flat terrain rules like in something like Marvel Crisis Protocol, for instance. And I'm happy to say this really isn't the case, so that's really nice. So if you're on the bottom part of a building, like on the ground floor of a building, the enemies can't shoot you, but if you're on the top, they can shoot you, but only if they actually have line of sight to you directly, like through a window or something. So I really like how terrain works the way you would imagine it would. And also, I really like how terrain now interacts with the next section, objectives. So yeah, another one of the heavily advertised elements of this new edition is that objectives aren't just circles on your map now if you're a competitive player. If you're me and my group, it's never just been circles. We use little terrain pieces as our objectives. But I guess that's true for everyone now, as terrain pieces are now objectives. And while I know there was a lot of jokes at first of like, okay, we're switching from standing in circles to standing in squares, that's really not the case here, it seems like, especially if you're playing on a full board of actual terrain with different levels and modeled details like we do. It really, I think having the objectives be those pieces of terrain is going to really add to the immersion. They also make it pretty explicit that you don't actually need to use the new terrain templates. You don't need to base your terrain. As long as you and your opponent agree on like where a terrain piece ends or begins, you don't actually need to do that, which is really nice. Although personally, I have been looking for an excuse to base all of my terrain and give them cool customized bases with rubble and stuff, so I might do that. Speaking of objectives, it's also cool they finally have a word for sticky objectives, which is just the colloquial term that fans use for when you walk away from an objective, you've left your stickiness on it. Is that why they call it that? So units and rules that reference objectives like that are now called secured. So they've secured the objective. It's not sticky. Also in the objective section, I've noticed there's a lot more of an emphasis on individual models rather than models as units. For example, your models now only get to score OC based on how many individual models are within range of the terrain piece. You don't just get the whole unit if you're close enough to it. And they've done the same thing for the shooting rules, I noticed as well. If only 5 of your models are within range to shoot someone, not the entire 10 of them, only 5 of them get to shoot. Where I think in the previous rules, they could all shoot. At least that's how we were playing. Maybe I just wasn't using the rules correctly. So I do kind of like this, that individual models have more agency in this edition rather than them just being tokens to represent the hit points of your units. Core stratagems. The core stratagems look pretty similar to me from what we had before. If there are differences here, it seems to mostly be in terms of wording. Maybe I've missed something. Grenades are now called explosives, for example, to account for all of the Molotov cocktails that my orcs are throwing around. But perhaps the biggest rule change here that's worth mentioning is the Fire Overwatch rule, which now takes place at the end of the movement phase instead of directly after your opponent has moved a unit. I think this is interesting because it kind of helps both players in a way. It also removes some of the cat and mouse dynamic of the Fire Overwatch rule, but more than anything, I think it's just going to save time. So I do like this change to the rule, and I'm curious to see it function in game. Final thoughts. So I think that covers most of the main rules changes that are present in the core rules, at least from what I could see. Let me know down in the comments if I missed anything. And from what I can tell, 11th edition seems to be more of an update patch to 10th edition rather than an entirely new game, which in my opinion is a good thing. I think especially, once again, for getting new players into the game, it's good to reassure people that not that much changes from edition to edition. It's just a way for Games Workshop to make money. Did I say that out loud? And what has changed, I think largely have been improvements. I couldn't really see a lot of things that I didn't like in the core rules. I guess my main worries and disappointments have to do with the removal of the Crusade system, which I guess isn't a huge deal as the old Crusade rules I think will still be compatible with 11th edition. Again, the rule set's not that different, so most of the Crusade books I think will work just fine with 11th edition. And it's also a little bit disappointing that they didn't include a new Spearhead type game mode, which I know a lot of us were kind of expecting them to do with the combat patrols, but I mean, it's fine. I don't think it's a huge deal. 40k is popular enough as it is, and we do have Kill Team as well to fill that slot. I'm also looking forward to seeing how the new card decks, which come with the Armageddon box, are going to affect gameplay. And speaking of these new card decks, I'm assuming a lot of the rules which are missing from the core rules document will be present in these new decks. At least I'm hoping so, as it seems like there's a lot of rules which are missing from these core rules, such as like how to build your army, how detachments work. I know there's a lot of new rules to do with detachments. You can take multiple detachments now. There's nothing about that in these rules. I'm assuming we will get an update on that soon online. So it's a little weird how many of the rules are missing here, but hopefully these will be online in just another document soon, and they're not going to lock everything behind an app or something, which I know some people are worried about. So stay tuned for more 11th edition coverage in the future. We've got the new box coming in soon. I'm hoping to paint them all up to upgrade my 10th edition armies to 11th edition. Make sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon if you want to see all of those updates. Thank you to all of our generous patrons for supporting this channel and allowing me to afford such things as the Armageddon box. And with that, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.